Hello everyone. Before we start today's video, if you could all do me a solid and lightly tap the like button, perhaps share the video about and leave a comment. If you are not subscribed, subscribe as well. It would greatly help this channel. Thank you very much. Well, isn't this just fantastic? Captain's log, subject 221204.8. To clone a turkey on the scale that I demand requires a power to be taken from a number of places, vital systems like our foosball room and the sex dungeon. I'd suggested life support, but old Dorky was not so receptive to it. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I want to pose a question, and throughout the video try and decide, based on what we learn through articles and tweets that are related, whether or not the answer to the question is very, not so much, not at all, maybe, who knows. Those are all answers you can go with. There is more to it, and of course, nuance is key. The question is, much like in the title, just how toxic is masculinity? It in and of itself can be argued to be a nuanced discussion. Are we applying this to historical reference? Are we using that as a template to determine what masculinity is now, and what a version of it is that is in and of itself toxic? Are we going to go back in history a mere 7 years? I say that explicitly because when I started on YouTube in 2015, oh boy, masculinity was toxic as fook. Are we basing it on structures of power? Are we basing it on different versions of masculinity, with one of them being considered the toxic limb? That can be argued to be subjective on the face of it because, let's say you are an alpha male. You're going to consider the beta male to be toxic. Why? Because they're soft. And in that same respect, the beta male, as they're often called, will then consider the alpha toxic because they're too hard. See the problem we have to deal with here, folks? Dead arguments from years ago, resurfacing now because apparently they have to. Don't worry though, we've got sources for this one. Strap yourselves in. It's that time of year again where we get to talk about everything manly. HShaw050890 tweeted to me on the 19th of October 2022 a NewYorker.com article asking that I talk about the article in question, where it is titled, How Toxic Is Masculinity? This is where we're going to go first, before we move on to something more recent that just happened to tie in quite coincidentally and afford us the opportunity to go back to this article. So the article in question is written by Zoe Heller, with 2 dots above the E, so no doubt I don't know how to pronounce your name properly. 10 years ago, Hannah's book The End of Men argued that feminism had largely achieved its aims, and that it was time to start worrying about the coming obsolescence of men. American women were getting more undergraduate and graduate degrees than American men, and were better placed to flourish in a feminized job market that prized communication and flexibility. For the first time in American history, they were outnumbering men in the workplace. The modern economy is becoming a place where women hold the cards, Hannah wrote. Now there is a point about the whole academic aspect that we should talk about. For example, less guys are going to college or university, and the reason why is because they want practical education, something they can take into a job market and apply instantly. NVQ's vocational qualifications are where most men seem to now gravitate, the younger crop that is. They want to be able to do things hands-on rather than wait 3, 5, 7 years to apply what they learn in a market, especially when meritocracy is supposed to be what benefits all society, and not things like affirmative action, equal representation, and other such asinine bollocks that takes away the point of academia in the first place and simply says, you don't have to be skilled to do this, nor do you have to have the inclination to want to do it. We just need the numbers, because representation is equality, everyone, and diversity is our strength. It's not. Stop forcing it down people's throats, okay? Real strength comes from talent, not from the hue of one's epidermis. And unless you get stronger like Superman by absorbing the sun's rays, it's all nonsense. Wake up, sheeple. The events of the past decade, the rise of Trump, the emergence of the Me Too movement, the overturning of Roe v. Wade have had a sobering effect on this sort of triumphalism. The general tone of feminist rhetoric has grown distinctly tougher and more cynical. Cheerful slogans about the femaleness of the future have receded. The word patriarchy, formerly the preserve of women's studies professors, has entered the common culture. Last year, in an article about women's exodus from their jobs during the pandemic, Hannah recanted her previous thesis and apologized for its tragic naivety. It's now painfully obvious that the mass entry of women into the workplace was rigged from the beginning. American work culture has always conspired to keep professional women out and working class women shackled. The perpetual victim mode, as it is more commonly known, attempting to use a more complex explanation for a remarkably simple solution. You just want to be a victim. Grow up. This is pathetic. Also, you mentioned the femaleness of the future have receded, the slogans that is. I do sometimes wonder if the argument of what a woman is had anything to do with that, because that argument has been going on for quite some time, and it has led to a big split in feminism. It really has, and the only reason patriarchy has become a more common culture term is because many use it ironically, because they think it's hilarious. And American work culture conspiring to keep women out and shackled. Well, if anyone knows anything about any workplace, it's not what you can do, it's who you know. Male or female, really. But as we all know, America is the center of the world here, so no doubt this is totally an Americanized interpretation in very specific places, not the entire bleeding country. Don't forget here, there's no version of any reality where any one view can represent the entire of America. It's just too big. Correction, unless it's guns. In which case, America. I am, of course, joking. Do try to lighten up. The article continues by discussing two academics who in turn released separate papers, both of whom agree that feminism, to maintain its relevancy, needs to have humane discourse capable of recognizing the suffering of men as well as women, something which others disagree with this. They both do recognize how the patriarchy rose, and that's something to discuss elsewhere. But later on in the article, it points out that feminism has been slow to emphasize and collaborate with men. One of the academic claims because too many in the movement remain wedded to the, whatever that worldview is, of male oppressors and female victims. Some feminists are unreconstructed leftist types who reject any evidence of women's progress as a mystification designed to hide the persistence of male domination. Others being duped by pro-woman romanticism into believing that women are innately nicer and more progressive than men, with the academic in question rejecting this sort of essentialist thinking, which he says provides a spurious biological rationale for traditional gender roles. If women are naturally kinder and more nurturing than men, and if men are intrinsically imbued with the culture of rape, why bother trying to change the status quo? Testosterone and other androgens may have something to do with male propensities towards aggression, which he concedes, but human beings are hostage neither to their biology nor their gender. The article in turn continues to talk about origins for things like the patriarchy. Why is it that men dominated society for as long as they did? Which in and of itself is a fascinating discussion to have, but I want to tie it in to something else. And for that we go to James Cameron, the man who tried to raise the bar, has one of the most successful movies of all time to his name, and is seeking to release a sequel now called The Way of Water, aka Avatar. He's also known, I believe, for the first two Terminator movies. The less we say about anything that happened afterwards, the better, because nothing afterwards counts. Alright? I saw this via a few tweets, and it tickled me to no end, with one person tweeting, "Dumbass doesn't understand biology." Hi, Miss Raven. A retweet of Jose Antonio PhD. James Cameron calls testosterone poison, says get it out of your system. And I thought on the face of it, it must be a joke. It must be a joke. In a wide-ranging article from The Hollywood Reporter spotlighting Cameron and the film, which ironically doesn't get into many of the details of the film, James Cameron discussed his working relationship with the Walt Disney Company, who is producing and distributing the film after they purchased 20th Century Fox because they have a monopoly. James Cameron noted he hasn't had any big clashes with any of the executives because maybe it's still a honeymoon phase. The director would then contrast it with his previous interactions with executives at 20th Century Fox, saying, "A lot of things I did earlier I wouldn't do career-wise, and just risks that you take as a wild testosterone-poisoned young man. I always think of testosterone as a toxin that you have to slowly work out of your system. Here's some mad science for you, James Cameron. Testosterone is not a toxin. Testosterone is a vital part in development and maintenance of typical masculine physical characteristics such as muscle mass and strength, along with growth of facial and body hair. It is actually quite important for men to do manly things like open jars, swatting flies with a newspaper, and of course, beating children. Now, all my sarcasm and jokes aside, the mad bants that come out of my mouth on a regular basis I'm known for after all, it's okay to be male, you know. There is nothing wrong with having testosterone. Hell, some people transition and use it to help with it. Some people are on hormone replacement therapy because their body doesn't produce enough of it. This unnecessary slagging off of humanity, or parts of humanity for what you interpret as inherently negative, or your interpretations that look like science denial. Couple that with the belief that perhaps you're focusing on the family unit, and some articles genuinely believe you're going to turn this movie into an arsehole dad movie. When it comes to the movie Avatar: The Way of Water, or Avatar 2, this has been a long time coming. The one thing you would want to do is promote it as best you can. Not what you believe, but the movie. Let's not forget here, many people who watch Avatar now concede that when you compare to the CGI of now, yes, of course, it absolutely set a standard then. But if you're going to do a movie that's predominantly CGI in this era, you've got to up your game. And people are very much on the fence as to whether or not James Cameron can do that. I will finish with the same sentence I said mere moments ago, minutes even. It's okay to be male. I'm going to link, by the way, the article I earlier referenced down below, because How Toxic Is Masculinity is a fascinating read. The answer, by the way, is it's not. It is not toxic in the slightest. There are things that need to be changed societally, yes. Does masculinity play a part? Of course. But it does not mean we have to reprogram an entire sex to do it. And you'll be hard-pressed to impact those changes in other countries that are not so liberally democratic. Or as others used to dub it, as soy boy riddle, which is haram.